What is up, guys? It is Sosa MMA, finally back again to recap what was the best MMA card in history in UFC 300. And I apologize for this video taking so long to get made. I got sick several times over the past week. And then with how long this video is to produce, it just made it a really difficult process. And then there was so much news coming out about the fighters involved too that factors in how this video has to get made. So I figured if it's going to be late, might as well be good. This is going to be the best video I can make post UFC 300. So as always, if you do end up liking this video, leave a like. Obviously, you don't know that yet, so you don't have to do that right now, but I'll remind you later just in case. But in this video, we're going to keep it real. We're going to break down every pick that I made on UFC 300, point out any things I left out in my analysis or things that I got right in my analysis, and then grade each pick too. But just because I got a pick right doesn't mean I'm going to get a good score, and just because I got a pick wrong doesn't mean I'm going to get a super bad score on it. There are some picks on here I got wrong that I've scored higher than some picks I got right. And the main reason for that is because let's say that I break down a fight and I pick a certain fighter to win and they do end up winning, but it's not for any of the reasons that I thought that they would win, then I'm not going to give myself a super good score for that, because I might have gotten the pick right, but I didn't actually analyze the fight correctly to come to that conclusion. Whereas if I analyzed the fight correctly and foresaw that there was a way for the fighter that I ended up picking to lose, and I was really close and on the fence and pointed out those things, I might be more lenient on myself for getting a pick wrong. We're going to see a good example of the latter in the first fight on the card, which was Deiveson Figueiredo taking on Cody Garbrandt. I predicted Deiveson Figueiredo would knock out Cody Garbrandt in round 2, and what I seriously overlooked was the amount of problems that Garbrandt would be able to give Figgy on the feet, as I didn't really break down his speed in that analysis at all. And I'm not really that hard on myself for doing that. I think a lot of analysts did that as well. And I think the main reason I did that is because while I understand, and pretty much everybody understands, that Cody Garbrandt is incredibly fast, he hasn't really demonstrated that at the highest level recently. He was getting outworked or knocked out and just looking terrible in most of his fights at the elite level, except for against Sun Tzu, and the Sun Tzu wasn't really elite at that point. He was at the end of his career. And then the only other people that he was showing his speed against was bums. And at that point, you don't really have a meter to be like, oh, wow, look at how much faster he is than Brian Kelleher. It's like, oh, wow, that's crazy, dude. It doesn't mean shit, though, right? So that's kind of why I didn't break that down. But it played a major role in this fight because Figgy really didn't have much of anything for Garbrandt on the feet. He landed one nice high kick while Garbrandt went for something stupid. But outside of that, really, it was Garbrandt's show on the feet. And that's why towards the end of round 1 and then more consistently in round 2, Figueiredo looked to get this fight to the ground. And I did highlight that he would have the grappling advantage, which I don't think a lot of analysts thought other than me, because Garbrandt had kind of an overrated ground game because he's really good at popping up and really good at defending takedowns at the initial point of entry. But if you can get him down to the ground, he's very controllable and has terrible jiu-jitsu, evidently, as while Figgy got him in a deep head and arm choke, was not able to finish it. I think that was more down to poor mechanics, not proper hip rotation, not proper chest and shoulder alignment from Figgy. And that might have been because of where they were located relative to the cage. I do think he still could have rotated his hips to get more torque rather on the choke, and it did look like Garbrandt was struggling to breathe to some capacity. But if you've been in a head and arm choke like that and had your partner not properly applying the choke to you, you know how uncomfortable it can be while you can still breathe just not super well, that you can still survive in a position like that. And that's what Garbrandt was doing, really. It was up to Figgy to finish the choke in the position he was in, and he failed to do that. But he did easily establish mount right afterwards and then work as soon as Garbrandt tried to get up on his back, got the rear naked choke in with ease, which happens a lot when guys stand up. They kind of think like, okay, I'm out of the grappling, right? Because I'm standing up. But if you've got that guy on your back, you're really not. And he was able to shoot his choke arm in. It was over from there. But I really didn't anticipate that. I anticipated Figgy would be able to bring it to Garbrandt on the feet and knock him out. be setting the terms for the fight on the feet, which he was not. But I still think that he showed great grappling in this fight. So we'll reflect that in how we matchmake him. But I'm going to be giving myself a C+ on this one. Not a great one here. I didn't get the method correct. I did get the fighter correct, but I didn't anticipate he would have to employ his grappling. So it was an underestimation of Cody Garbrandt. But let's move on to matchmaking both of these individuals. This fight, I think I really like it. I'm not sure how the timetable on it will play out, but I really like Petr Yan versus Deiveson Figueiredo. Deiveson clearly wants to fight for gold at 135, and while he has since called out Dominic Cruz, I do not think beating Dominic Cruz in 2024, who is ranked at like number 11, number 12 or something like that in the bantamweight rankings. Let me see. I have him pulled up like over here. Where is Dominic Cruz at in the bantamweight rankings? He is number 11, which is 5 spots lower than Deiveson Figueiredo. So make it make sense how beating him would give you a title shot. I don't understand. But regardless, I think beating Petr Yan definitely would. And I think Petr Yan beating Deiveson Figueiredo, who's a former champion in another weight class, moved up, and is hot streaking now, having beat Rob Font and Cody Garbrandt. This is a great matchup to make. And you can see at the top here kind of the order in which I'd like to see the title shots go. I'd like to see Merab fight for it next, obviously. Then I would prefer to not see Umar fight Corey, because while I understand Umar's getting ducked by a ton of people in the rankings, and that whenever he does get fights booked in the rankings, there's something that happens that makes him pull out of those fights, or his opponent pull out. Just, it's really unlucky. And I doubt that that would happen against Corey Sandhagen, except for it kind of did. I do think that they'd be able to finalize this matchup if they really wanted to in like Abu Dhabi or something like that. I just don't think it makes sense to have Corey Sandhagen do that. I would rather see someone like a Marlon Vera do that, a Henry Cejudo do that. Even arguably a Figgy could do that. But regardless, I think that Petr Yan versus Deiveson Figueiredo is the fight to make. Let Merab and Corey fight for the belt, and then the winner of this fight fights for the belt next. And I also think that we should give a pretty nice matchmaking to Cody Garbrandt, because he did not look bad in this fight at all. So this is like a top 25 matchup at bantamweight. And I want to see Cody Garbrandt take on Adrian Yanez. Both guys coming off of a loss, 2 in a row for Yanez, both by finish. But this is a super fun matchup. It's going to play out on the feet, so we don't have to answer questions about Cody Garbrandt's grappling, which is fine because you won't really run into a ton of really heavy grapplers until you get to the top of this division. Really, there's like a lot of striking heavy fighters through a lot of it. And this is a super fun striking matchup, almost guaranteed to get a knockout. And I think Cody Garbrandt can knock out Adrian Yanez. I think Adrian Yanez can knock out Cody Garbrandt. So super interesting. I think Cody Garbrandt's leg kicks won't be a factor, like they never are, because he just throws that really stupid one. And yeah, I'd really like to see this matchup as well. You could put this on a fight night as well. This could headline a fight night with how terrible they've been lately, and I'd actually kind of like that. I mean, like, this ain't going 5 rounds, but I'm excited when we get there, you know? Like, it's not a bad matchup at all. I like this fight a lot. Let's move on, though. The next fight was Bobby Green taking on Jim Miller. And I was completely off on this one. I think the main thing that I failed to break down here, and it was pretty evident that the head movement, the footwork of Bobby Green could give a plotter like Jim Miller problems. And I do want to cut myself some slack here, because the main reason I thought that it wouldn't is because I thought Jim Miller would catch him. And he did big, like at the beginning of round 1, at the end of round 1. But pretty much after Bobby Green opened up that cut on Jim Miller, this fight was over. It was impressive. Jim Miller managed to thug it out, but I was totally wrong on this pick. I was totally wrong with how depleted Bobby Green's chin would be after that horrible knockout to Jalen Turner. And I was completely wrong about Jim Miller's ability to finish Bobby Green in this fight. So I'm going to give myself a D+ here, not being too harsh on myself, because Bobby Green did get hurt by Jim Miller. but still a pretty bad pick. I think I was blinded by wanting Jim Miller to win on all 3 cards because the storyline is so good. And, you know, I'd probably pick it again because I really do feel like there's about maybe 3 out of 10, 4 out of 10 worlds where Jim Miller actually does get that knockout. And we're talking about this fight differently, but that's not the ones that we live in. We're in the 7 out of 10 here, where Bobby Green styles on Jim Miller and cuts an incredible promo, making the next section of this video really easy for me. We are going to match Bobby Green up with Paddy Pimblett. We don't have to worry about the complicated politics in the bottom of the lightweight rankings. We're just going to pull Paddy Pimblett up into the rankings. If he can beat Bobby Green, then he is a ranked lightweight. We have to start talking about Paddy Pimblett versus some guys in the top 15, some guys in the top 10. He can start calling names and making a move for Islam Makhachev, which I don't think would go great for him, to be candid with you, but we just have to see how that plays out. But for Jim Miller, I want to see him against someone terrible like a Ricky Glenn. That would be pretty cool, I think. Just so he can just knock someone out or submit them and get back in the win column, because that's what we want to see Jim Miller do. He's not retired, and we don't want to see him retire until he chooses to retire. So we'll move on. Not going to take too long on this one. I'm gonna grade myself semi-harshly for this one because I thought that Marina Rodriguez would be able to get the finish. To be fair, I do think there's avenues for her to do that, but while she fought pretty well for most of this fight, she slipped in round 1, surrendered top position to Jessica Andrade, and just let her win that round, and then lost big moments in like every other round after that at the very end of them. Pretty bad performance from her. Not a great performance from Jessica Andrade either. Bad performance for me in picking it. Gonna be a D plus on this one. Let's do Jessica Andrade versus Verna Jandiroba. The winner fights the winner of Zhang Weili versus Tatiana Suarez. And yeah, that's all I have to say about this matchup. And then Marina Rodriguez will take on Lupi Godinez. No, it's still a jump up in Lupi Godinez in the rankings, but she was streaking really well before fighting Verna Jandiroba, who is a top 5 fighter. You have Rodriguez hanging out right underneath. This is a good fight. The winner gets to maintain their position in the upper top 10 and look to kind of make an advance at the title once again if they get past the other one. And that can probably go on like the fight night in the Apex somewhere. I'm sure that this is the kind of fight they would put there. Let's move on to Jalen Turner taking on Renato Moicano. And I think I completely broke down this fight correctly, to be honest with you. Jalen Turner basically knocked out Renato Moicano in round 1, but he just demonstrated incredibly poor fight IQ. Tried to walk off instead of dropping down to finish Renato Moicano. I don't believe he did that because he was worried about Renato Moicano like latching up a submission while he did that or something. He's never been submitted before, so it wasn't something I think that he was extremely worried about happening here. But he did not get the finish, and instead it was Renato Moicano scoring his first ever win by knockout against Jalen Turner, who just wilted under the money Moicano pressure. And he did not make a call out, interestingly, but I've got one cooked up for Renato Moicano, and some people might not like it, but I think it's the fight to make. I have to grade myself first. Even though I did have Renato Moicano by split decision here, I'm giving myself an A plus, even though I ended up switching this pick to Jalen Turner by knockout. And the reason that I'm gonna do that is because, like I said, Jalen Turner did knock out Renato Moicano. He's just an idiot and decided not to finish the fight. And Renato Moicano exploited the game plan that I knew that he would be able to, and outlined in my video that he would, that led me to wanting to pick him against Jalen Turner. I'm just too much of a Jalen Turner fan, switched it up, but my analysis was super good on this fight, so I'm not going to penalize myself for that, actually. But the pick that I have here is Mateusz Gamrot versus Hinata Moicano. Now, you might be thinking, what about Justin Gaethje? What about Charles Oliveira? If you want Hinata Moicano to fight in the top 5 off of this win streak that he's on, why make Mateusz Gamrot do it? And that's because Mateusz Gamrot, his last fight, was against Rafael dos Anjos, who was previously ranked number 12, has now moved down all the way to number 14. And he almost got knocked out by him in round 1. And he barely beat him. It was not an impressive performance whatsoever from Gamrot. And I think that he needs to defend his top 5 spot against Hinata Moicano. And I think Charles Oliveira was arguably beating Arman Tsarukyan in both the first and third round. But, split decision. It's tough. You don't get the nod. And I don't think it was a robbery. I just think that Charles should have won that fight. And Justin Gaethje, while he got his ass beat by Max Holloway, he is still a guy who had knocked out the guy who was about to fight next for the belt. So having him fight against someone like Hinata Moicano doesn't make a ton of sense to me either. So that's why I say let's make Gamrot do it. It's Gamrot's job to do now. Let's do Jalen Turner versus Benoit Saint Denis. I kind of hate this as a Jalen Turner fan that I'm advocating for this to happen. But I think Jalen Turner needs to beat a fucking grappler. He needs to be able to at some point. And I think Benoit is sloppy enough on the feet that he is knockoutable for Jalen Turner. But that he also can fix those holes in his game and come out great against Jalen Turner and win a really close matchup in the top 15 to kind of make his argument to move up in the rankings, maybe fight like a Fiziev next, a Michael Chandler coming off of a loss to Connor, maybe a Beneil Dariush, something like that. Something like that if he is able to get through Jalen Turner. And Jalen Turner, please just beat a grappler, man. Be able to beat a grappler, please. My score on the early prelims is pretty bad. It's going to be a C- because I only got one pick right. That was one out of my 2 confident picks. I was not confident in Turner. I was not confident in Rodriguez. But unfortunately, I was confident in Jim Miller, so that'll detract from the overall here. But I didn't get any fighter and method correct, so we're just going to round it out. It's a C-. Pretty abysmal on the early prelims. And starting out on the normal prelims, we have Diego Lopes versus Sodiq Yusuff. Now, this one, I'm not too hard on myself for because I knew that Diego Lopes definitely could knock Sodiq Yusuff out. It's just that it hasn't happened as much to Sodiq Yusuff, and I envisioned Sodiq being able to land his bombs sooner, as Lopes is aggressive, is action-oriented, but doesn't tend to have as explosive power, as big of windups as Sodiq Yusuff. But that turned out to not matter at all, as Sodiq Yusuff had a strategy to try and look for a double collar tie clinch, probably trying to initiate some, dirty boxing exchanges, some tie striking exchanges with Diego Lopes, but Lopes exploited the biggest hole in that clinch, and that was the uppercuts up the middle, as well, using hooks to just brutally finish Sodiq Yusuff. And I think that him being too chill, as I highlighted, and focusing on that strange clinch-oriented game plan that he had really came to bite him. And I do think that there's still conditioning questions for Diego Lopes to an extent, but we didn't get to the point where that was ever a question in this fight, obviously, because he finished it incredibly quickly. And he also hits harder than Sodiq Yusuff, but I don't think that that's like at high end. I just think that he's able to get really great power into his shots without loading everything into him. So he's just really technical, and it really pays off. So I want to give myself a B- here for this one. I definitely could have done better on it. It's teetering on being a C here, but I just anticipated Sadiq would give him more problems than Diego did, and I was totally wrong on that. But I was also really trying to counter my bias on this card to not just pick fighters that I like if I see a path to victory for them. So even though I saw the path to victory for Diego to knock out Sadiq, I didn't want to pick it, as I thought that it was just me thinking it was the most likely because I'm a Diego fan. So that was a flawed counter bias from me. I want to see Diego take on Josh Emmett and just go higher up in the rankings. If Josh Emmett wants to fight Tapuria, he ain't fighting Volk. That was a dipshit call out. You're not getting Volk. His next fight will be for the belt, even if Max fights for the belt next. He ain't fighting you, little bro. That's for sure. You got to beat someone like Diego Lopez. This fight's going to be high action. I really feared for Diego Lopez in this matchup. I do think he's a lot better than Josh Emmett, and I do think that I could see him beating up Josh Emmett in a way not dissimilar to how Tapuria did, but probably getting the finish because he is more finish oriented and more willing to look for a submission on the ground than I feel like Tapuria was in that fight. But it's going to be a great fight, no matter what. Put that on a fight night main event. That's fantastic. I don't know why all the fight night main events just got to be Josh Emmett getting his ass beat, but I'm here for it, though. I think it's cool. And then I think Joe Anderson Brito is going to win his fight on 301. And I think Sadiq Yusuff, coming off of a loss where he did nearly finish Edson Barboza, but ended up getting just outworked for the rest of the fight, just outcrafted, then also losing to Diego Lopez, who was outside of the rankings. I don't want to see him fall out of the rankings, so I'm glad he's still number 15, but he does have to defend this spot. I don't think that he deserves to move up at all in the rankings off of that. And I think that he's got to defend it against someone really good in Joe Anderson Brito. And if he's able to win this fight, then we can talk about him moving back up in the rankings. So this isn't just some rebound, like whatever in between win. Joe Anderson Brito is legit. So that would be a great win for him to pick up. But let's move on to Holly Holm versus Kayla Harrison. This is my first really just like great pick here. I didn't end up switching it to a finish, but I did say that with the inclusion of elbows, I felt that it was pretty possible Kayla Harrison could do a serious amount of damage to Holly Holm on the ground and end up securing the finish. And that's exactly what she ended up doing. If I did switch it to a finish, I would have picked her by KO. Or TKO. I did end up betting on her by submission shortly before the fight started, so I got a little bit of money off that, which was sick, but I didn't end up picking it, so I will just give myself an A+ for this one, because I knew she would dominate her on the ground. All I wanted to see was her make weight, and that's what she did, so we were all in the clear as soon as that happened. But yeah, she looked incredible. That's what I thought would happen, and screw her fighting anybody else at bantamweight. Throw her in there with Pennington. Let's see what happens. Make me interested in this division again, Kayla Harrison, please. I'm not doing matchmaking for Holly Holm. She should retire. Let's talk about Calvin Kattar, Aljamain Sterling. I think everything really came to fruition here. I think Calvin Kattar looked pretty terrible, but I don't think that that's necessarily his fault. I think coming off of that long layoff and such a big injury just really diminished the performance he was able to provide. Aljo stunk it up, but he did exactly what he needed to. He did get the power bomb, and when you're fighting someone like Calvin Kattar in your first fight at featherweight, that's a legit dude for sure. So I understand him not being able to take risks the way he wanted to, and Calvin Kattar also paralyzing a lot of the positions to not take any risks himself, which led to a lot of the boringness of this fight, which isn't necessarily Aljo's fault, and that does have to be acknowledged as well. But I'm going to give this myself an A+ here. Had Aljo by unanimous decision. Aljo got it by unanimous decision. Pretty damn perfect, if you ask me. A lot of people have been saying they want to see Aljo fight Ortega. And I like that matchup too. I think it's a cool one. But I think that, honestly, as stupid as it is, Ortega, in my opinion, deserves a title shot more than Evloev. And it's not just because Evloev's a decision merchant. It's because he barely beat Arnold Allen. And I kind of think Arnold Allen beat him. So it's just really hard for me to argue for a guy who like won his last fight by split decision to fight for the belt next. Like, why should you be fighting for the belt? Was it a split decision? I don't know, but it was a controversial decision if it wasn't a split decision. Regardless, I think it has the same energy as a split decision. Like, it was not clear to me that Movsar Evloev had won that fight by the end of it. Is my main point in that. So I think putting Aljo against Movsar takes who could potentially be two of the more boring matchups to fight for the belt and guaranteed eliminates one of them from fighting for the belt. So I think that would be a great thing to do. I think that's smart. And I think that we should also look to have Calvin Kattar fight down the rankings a bit against Bryce Mitchell, brother. I think that this will answer questions about his grappling, brother. And if he can get through Bryce Mitchell, then we can talk about him maybe in some matchups, maybe like an Emmett rematch, something like that. But he's got to get through someone lower in the rankings than him, coming back and losing to someone in their featherweight debut, even if it was a former champ, and doing it without really putting up much of an effort in the fight means that you got to take something lower in the rankings. And I think that this would be the best one to do. Next, we had Jiří Prochazka taking on Alexander Rakic in what I thought was robbed for fight of the night. And in this fight, Alexander Rakic actually had an incredible performance, but he ended up losing anyways because Jiří just tanked every leg kick that he threw, every shot that landed to his head, and walked him down and just ended up landing with more power, ended up throwing Rakic onto the ground and jumping on him to get the ground and pound TKO in round 2. And I think it was a fantastic performance from Jiří. I am going to give myself an A+ on this one. Once again, got the fighter and the method correct. And I was going to match Jiří Prochazka up with Jamal Hill, but as we'll talk about later, I can't do that anymore. So we are going to do Jiří Prochazka versus Jan Blachowicz instead. I really like this matchup. Jiří Prochazka, Jan Blachowicz have not faced off. Both are very much in the title picture at 205. Whoever wins this could definitely make their case for a rematch with Poatan if they end up if Poatan ends up being champ by the time that this fight takes place. And these guys have honestly given Poatan his closest fights at 205 because Jiří had done way more successful things on the feet than Jamal Hill at any point in their fight. And Jan Blachowicz actually survived the left hook, which nobody else at 205 has yet managed to do. And some people even think he won that fight. I don't think he won that fight. I don't think those people are cooking, but some people think he won that fight. So whoever wins this, pretty clear contender to fight for the belt once again, I think, here in the top 5 at light heavyweight. And Rakic had a great performance, so I don't want to see him move too far down in the rankings. Let's match him up with Nikita Krylov as long as he's not dead or like missing or something like that, because I don't know what's up with this guy. But this is a great matchup. There's really fun grappling to be had in this matchup, actually. The striking is super fun in this matchup as well. And whoever wins this is 1 or 2 fights out from fighting for the belt. So super good fight for Rakic to take. Super dangerous fight for Rakic to take. But every fight at 205 is dangerous in that top like 12 area. So let's move on and break down how I did for the prelims. Much better than the early prelims. We went 3 for 4. 3 for 3 on the confident picks. I think the only one that I didn't end up doing as a confident pick on this one was the Diego Lopez Sadiq Yusuff one. So even though I missed on that one, I didn't end up missing on any confident picks here. I did get the correct method on Aljo and Yuri, so that's pretty nice. I will end up giving myself an A, and we are breaking into the main card here. And I actually did really good job of breaking down this one. And I think the main reason was because while I did end up picking Bo by round 1 submission, I put a big asterisk there and said that I think there's a huge chance Cody Brundage makes it to the second round. So if you could get a good line on it, do. I think I couldn't. I'm pretty sure it was like still minus money to go into the second round, which sucked, and I was not taking that. So I should have and just like bet the house on it, because that's what ended up happening. But that's not a wise financial decision when someone like Bo Nickal is in the octagon. He's very talented, risky bet to make if you're not getting a high return off of whatever you're putting in there. And we also have some caveats here as we go into matchmaking, because I wanted to see Bo take an actual jump up in competition against someone like Cedric Dumas. But there's been some rumblings based on Jacob Malkoon's Instagram that he might be getting the Bo Nickal fight at 302. This hasn't been, like, for what I've seen, it all confirmed yet. But if so, that is an actually ginormous jump up in competition. Because while Malkoon isn't like an elite middleweight or anything like that, he is a competent grappler who looked way better on the feet in his last time out than I've ever seen him look on the feet, and isn't a Cody Brundage. Now you might say, well, Cody Brundage beat Jacob Malkoon. Cody Brundage was getting the shit beaten out of him by Jacob Malkoon. Jacob Malkoon was beating Cody Brundage more convincingly than Bo Nickal did. And then it was a back of the head strike, I want to say, that ended up making Cody Brundage have a way to quit that fight and get the win. But he was not winning that fight. He was getting his ass beat, and it was way more convincing from Jacob Malkoon than it was from Bo Nickal, which makes me really interested if that is the matchup they've made. That is like a stiff jump up in competition. I think that I would have expected them to put him against someone like, I don't know, like a Gerald Mearshart or something like that, where it's just like way less of a risk, for somebody as important to the company as Bo Nickal. But if that fight ends up getting made, I'm pretty stoked for that, and I might pick Malkoon. We'll see, though. And for Cody Brundage, I really want to see how he would take on a really stacked line at McDonald's. Like, I'm talking lunch rush. Everybody is trying to get in there. Maybe the McRib is back on this particular day. Something like that. And I want to see what Cody Brundage could do in that sort of environment. And if he gets past that, maybe we can see him in the UFC again. Let's talk about Charles Oliveira, Arman Tsarukyan. In this fight, when I made my full breakdown for it, I said that I thought it would be tough for Arman to finish Charles on the ground by knockout. And that was true. He did get serious ground and pound off in round 2, but he was never close to finishing Charles. Charles was able to scramble, able to control posture, able to survive on the ground with Arman in top position. I said I wouldn't see him getting a sub, and he didn't really come close to any. And I said that I thought it would be tough for him to win a decision because Charles has the ability to finish those fights. The last person who was able to survive to a decision with him, I'm pretty sure, was Tony Ferguson. And that was just because he was able to thug out some super deep submission attempts. And Arman did the same thing as that and utilized a similar game plan to what Islam did against Charles. And I just anticipated that if he did what Islam did in the grappling with Charles, that Charles would be able to scramble and put Arman in bad positions to make him lose. And while Charles lost the decision and lost round 2, I would still argue that in round 3, he did prove me correct in scrambling for and ultimately securing a Darce choke that was very close that Arman was able to thug out. But on my scorecard, Charles won the first and the third. I'm not salty about it. I don't think it was a robbery, and I think that there's a route for Arman to have won the third. But I think the first has to go to Charles, and I think that the third is a pretty good argument for Charles as well. So I'm not going to be that harsh on myself for this matchup. I'm going to give myself a B minus, bordering on a C here. But while I thought that Charles would hurt him on the feet, that wasn't how Charles ended up getting close to finishing. But the rest of the analysis was solid. I really did break down the problems that I thought Charles would give him correctly. I just envisioned that there would be more aggression from Charles on the feet, which I think he didn't want to because of the ground and pound threat that Arman proved to be at some points. He was much more tentative on the feet, which, to be fair, we didn't actually really see against Makhachev. He was still throwing unorthodox attacks on the feet through round 2 in that fight, and that's why he got clipped. So perhaps that had some role to play in it, but Arman never really disciplined Charles with power on the feet in this fight either. So next up for Arman, this is tough, man, because like I said, I don't really like a guy who's coming off of a split decision win to fight for the belt next. But Justin Gaethje doesn't deserve to fight Arman, who has the #1 ranking and is on a win streak. Dustin Poirier is fighting for the belt next, and they're in the same team as each other. Doesn't make any sense for them to fight. Garbrandt also doesn't deserve to fight the #1 guy at all. Because he, like I said earlier, barely beat RDA. So why would you go from barely beating RDA to fighting the guy who just, even though he barely did it, barely got through Charles Oliveira? That's a completely different level when you're barely getting through Charles Oliveira versus barely getting through RDA. He obviously already knocked out Beneil Dariush. Michael Chandler's locked up with Conor McGregor. Fizieve's coming off of a loss. Max Holloway is the only fight that makes any molecule of sense here. And that's only if Holloway doesn't get the matchup that I think he deserves to get, which we'll talk about later, obviously. And I also just don't see Arman taking that when he probably does have a case for a title shot against Islam Makhachev. And then that really leaves Renato Moicano, but that's a jump up in ranking from 10th to #1. That doesn't make any sense at all. So there's nobody who makes sense for Arman to fight besides Islam. So as begrudgingly as it is, after Islam defeats Dustin Poirier, if he does, then he will fight Arman. And while controversial, I think that there is a case that Islam Makhachev does deserve an immediate rematch if he loses to Dustin Poirier, mainly because of the nature of Dustin Poirier's title shot in conjunction with the defenses that Islam Makhachev has racked up. So in such an instance, I would say Islam gets an immediate title shot back. And then that also makes sense because Arman isn't going to fight Dustin for the belt. I guess they could, but that would cause like a bunch of drama. So that would just be kind of something you'd want to avoid happening. So then maybe he fights Max in that instance. But let's move on. Charles Oliveira. Let's do the Gaethje rematch. Like I said, you could have him match up with someone like a Moicano maybe, but you're not putting him against Poirier, who's fighting for the belt. Garbrandt doesn't deserve to fucking fight Charles Oliveira, who's ranked #2, coming off of a barely win against RDA. Doesn't make any sense. Beneil already got knocked out by Charles recently. Chandler, if he beats McGregor, maybe a rematch with Chandler, maybe. Fiziev coming off of a loss. Holloway versus Charlie Olives 2 is something I considered. That's kind of a badass fight. I kind of like that, but I don't know if it makes sense right now. Let's just run it back. Charles Olives, Justin Gaethje, #2. Whoever wins is back in the title picture. Maybe needs one more win. Maybe doesn't. Depends on how good the win is, I guess. Let's move on to the best fight on the card. Also, my best pick on the card as I broke down the weaknesses in Justin Gaethje of the body shots. And Max Holloway saw it too, which he was able to exploit. And he did have problems with the low kicks to an extent, but he did a really good job of stepping off of the center line, sort of into Justin Gaethje. It's tough to explain without pictures or videos from the fight, but he took a lot of juice off of a lot of those leg kicks. So while there was a welt forming, you didn't really see Max Holloway, who is comfortable fighting orthodox or southpaw, switch at all when he easily could have done that until like the very end of the fight. And you saw him giving serious issues to Justin Gaethje throughout the entire fight. Prior to the nose break, he was still giving Justin Gaethje issues with his movement, with his varied entries behind a jab, a body jab, a straight to the body, low kicks, kicks to the body, both teeps to the body and round kicks to the body, teeps to the leg, round kicks to the leg. You had him going high with his right uppercut. You had him using that as a lead and hand fighting with Justin Gaethje's lead hand to land that. You had him throwing that and landing hooks behind it. You had so much on display from Max Holloway, but perhaps the winning fight ending maneuver was not the right hand at the end, but instead the spinning kick that, while it landed all but one time throughout the fight, did Max Holloway throw and land it. He was just out of range on the last one that he didn't end up landing. The first one comes at the last second of round one. Looks like it connects just to the body, but because Gaethje tends to duck his head in whenever he's going in for an exchange, whether it's against the cage or in the center of the octagon, as long as he's coming into the pocket, he tends to duck in. When Max Holloway threw that kick, it ended up clipping Justin Gaethje on his nose and his chin before landing to the body. He stumbles backwards. His nose is clearly broken, which has a ginormous impact on him throughout the rest of the fight. But I don't think this would have changed the result. I do think that the body work would have set up the same problems for Gaethje that it ended up doing. I just think that this made it even worse because his nose was so fucked up, and he had to breathe through his mouth. Now his chin is gaping open. The head damage becomes more and more exacerbated as the fight goes on. But the real kicker is that when they go for that crazy middle of the octagon exchange that Holloway called for at the end of the fight, you can see Gaethje reaching down for shots to the body that Max Holloway is throwing before he comes high with the right hook, which just goes to show you the damage that they were accruing over the course of that fight. And ultimately, Max Holloway is the baddest motherfucker in the UFC. By round 5 knockout, I was pretty fucking close though. I'm going to give myself an S plus for this one. This was an incredible pick, and I really put it all out there on this one, and I got it right. And I want to see Max Holloway face off with Ilia Topuria next. The boxing in this fight is so incredible. If Ilia Topuria decides to mix in his grappling, I'm really interested to see how Max will end up responding to that as well. But this is the fight to make. This is the fight Max wants. I want Max to stay at 155, but if that's not what Max Holloway wants to do, that's not what Max Holloway needs to do. And I'm not going to say, oh, he's going to look bad when he cuts the weight back down to 145, because I am never going to doubt Max Holloway again. Whether I think he's going to win this matchup or not, I think I learned my lesson. Even in picking him, I didn't think that he would pitch a shutout against Justin Gaethje quite the way he did. And yeah, it was an incredible performance, one of the best I've ever seen live. Let's move on to Zhang Weili versus Yan Xiaonan. I think I did a really good job breaking down this fight because I knew that Zhang Weili would have the better of Yan Xiaonan, largely because of her grappling and her ground game, but that there was avenues for Yan Xiaonan to knock Zhang Weili down on the feet, which is exactly what happened. So I'm going to give myself an S for this. I'm not matchmaking on Xiaonan because I'm not honestly sure who she should fight. And it felt like a very laborious task to do. And I'd rather just tell you that Tatiana Suarez, Zhang Weili should happen, even though Tatiana Suarez pulled out of her last fight against Lemos. Who else is going to fight for the belt? Jessica Andrade getting a split decision win off of Marina Rodriguez. She going to fight for the belt? Verna Jean Giroba? She going to fight for the belt? No. It's Tatiana Suarez. She's fighting for the belt. Book it. You can like co-main event it on International Fight Week. Unless that's the McGregor card. I don't know if that would like fit the vibe low key of that. You might need, even though it's like a shittier division, you might need like a women's bantamweight fight. If you get Kayla Harrison, Raquel Pennington there, bro, that might fit the vibe because I think that Kayla Harrison will run through her and she can do some trash talk. Unlike this fight where you won't have much of that at all. But let's move on to my biggest L on the card and of the year. Terrible pick. I did know that Jamal Hill was open to the left hook, but really the problem behind this pick and why it was so bad is that while Jamal Hill does have the power to knock out Alex Pereira, he is fucking terrible. He's not good. And he is levels below Pereira in the striking. Now, fucking terrible might be a little bit of a stretch. He's not that bad. But engaging in the hand fighting to the degree that he was with Pereira was so bad because it was causing him problems the entire fight, with Alex Pereira setting up rhythms with the hand fighting and breaking them for his offense, that when Pereira eventually wanted to land a big left hook, it was easy for him to do it. Couple that with Alex Pereira having a far more advanced understanding of the lead outside foot positioning somehow, which is crazy, by the way, because obviously, if you're a great kickboxer who's fought a bunch of southpaws, you understand lead outside foot positioning if you're an orthodox, obviously. But if you are a southpaw in MMA, you are primarily fighting orthodox fighters. And those orthodox fighters, like Alex Pereira, are primarily fighting other orthodox fighters and never have to employ lead outside foot positioning in their fights, whereas every time you fight, you do. Like almost all of them. So, how, then, are you losing lead outside foot positioning not only at critical junctures in the fight, but at the most critical juncture in the fight? When he steps on your foot as you're going for that left hand and just clobbers you by parrying down your lead hand. The lack of awareness of the flaws in his hand fighting, the lack of awareness in the lead outside foot positioning battle was astonishing from Jamal Hill. And I'm giving myself a terrible score for this one. Alex Pereira showed levels against Jamal Hill. He ended my main event pick streak for the year for pay-per-views. But I'll bounce back. And the matchmaking here. I want to see Alex Pereira move up to heavyweight at UFC 301 and fight like a Chris Barnett. He doesn't have to fight anybody like too crazy good. They don't even have to be ranked, bro. I don't care. Just let him fight someone at heavyweight at 301. He doesn't have to cut weight. He can even put on some weight if he wants to and still totally be fine. Don't make it anybody too good. Make it someone that he can definitely beat by knockout. Don't put him in there with anybody who's going to try and grapple with him. And yeah, I want to see him on 301. It feels like we're creeping past when they'd be able to announce something like that, but you never know. Maybe they're trying to keep it under wraps. I know Poetan wants to do this, and I really the only outcome where it would be possible is him knocking Hill out in round 1 while taking virtually no damage, which is exactly what happened. So I want to see this happen. We need this to happen for 301 to be a great card. Imagine if now the featured fight is the return of the King of Rio. The co-main event is Poatan at heavyweight against some bum, where it doesn't even matter if he loses because he's still the champion at light heavyweight afterwards. And then you have the main event of Alexandre Pantoja versus Steve Erceg. Yay, 301. But Jamal Hill booked in a really weird fight against Khalil Roundtree. Not weird insofar as Khalil Roundtree does deserve a move up the rankings here, but weird insofar as that Jamal Hill is turning around at UFC 302, which is a super quick turnaround after getting brutally knocked out. And he's doing it against somebody with knockout power. A lot of people are automatically picking Khalil Roundtree here because of the quick turnaround. And then there's a lot of people automatically picking Hill because Roundtree had openings on the feet that Anthony Smith was able to capitalize on in their fight. I don't really know how I want to pick this fight yet, and I think that both sides are rushing it a lot on this pick because I feel that Khalil Roundtree is likely being overrated on the feet. But I also feel there's a large chance Jamal Hill is also being largely overrated on the feet, even in this matchup. I do think this is a ginormous step down in competition from Alex Pereira, but I think that's just because Alex Pereira is the best striker in the heavyweight classes, and it's not particularly close because hand fighting really, like, he's had good hand fighting throughout his career, don't get me wrong, but he hasn't demonstrated a command of hand fighting to the degree he was able to just nuke Hill with. If you haven't rewatched this fight, but just watching Alex Pereira's lead hand versus Jamal Hill's lead hand, that's pretty much the entire reason he won. I'm going to say it. It was the biggest factor in why he won is that he was able to completely abuse and manipulate Jamal Hill's timing, positioning, everything with his lead hand battle. He was levels above Jamal Hill in the striking, but I also think Jamal Hill is getting overrated. He was supposed to fight Anthony Smith at 1.2, so I would have liked to see that matchup to kind of get some MMA math going, but I'm not sure how to pick this fight, but it is the fight that's happening, so don't know why Hill's coming back so early too. We might see him come to regret that, but at the end of the day, on the main card, I don't think I did super bad, to be honest with you, because while I got Charles and Jamal Hill wrong, and Jamal Hill wrong was super bad, I'm going to take my L for that one. I don't think that the Charles one was that bad. And then I was perfectly correct on fighter and method for the 3 that I did get right. The only confident one I got wrong was Charles. So that's pretty good too. I'm going to give myself an A there and then a B plus overall. But the card is an S plus tier overall. Thank you guys for your patience in myself getting this video out. There will be videos coming out as well talking about UFC 302 and the announcements surrounding that, UFC 303 and the return of the Mac. If you liked this video, please do like, subscribe for more if you are interested in that. And thank you guys so much for sticking this long. Have a wonderful rest of your day, and peace.